All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tufts Lawyers Association's ongoing informational and educational webinar series. My name is Andre Baines, class of 1991. I am a member of the TLA National Board of Directors, and I'm co-chair of the Public Interest and Social Justice Committee, which is sponsoring the event tonight. For those of you who are unfamiliar with TLA, or the Tufts Lawyers Association, it is an alumni organization that's comprised of alumni in all aspects of the legal profession. It's really designed to serve the university and provide networking opportunities to its members. Before we jump into the substance of tonight's conversation, I think we can all generally agree that the last few years have been extremely challenging in the workplace for all of us, particularly for legal professionals and lawyers. We've endured a global pandemic. We've had to shift our work paradigm, if you will, into more dynamic working and work from home. We have increased pressures and demands on us for productivity gains in the workplace. And obviously, we are continuing to work on that elusive goal of maintaining work and life balance. I think all of these factors have led to a degradation in overall wellness for many in the workplace. So it's with all of these issues in mind that we wanted to have this discussion tonight on this very timely topic of wellness in the workplace from a legal perspective. We are pleased to have a distinguished group of panelists who will participate in tonight's event. Our moderator for tonight will be Eric Mack, class of 2004. Eric is an employment litigator, and he's a shareholder at Littler Mendelson. Eric is going to lead the discussion with our panelists, who include Mimsey Cauley, class of 1998, who is Associate General Counsel at Signature Healthcare. Janine Hamner Holman, who is President and co-founder of the J&J Consulting Group. Amanda McDavid, class of 2009, who is Senior Technical Advisor for Health at the U.S. Department of Labor. And last but not least, Lili Palacios-Baldwin, who is Deputy General Counsel for Labor, Employment, and Litigation at Tufts University. If you are looking for additional information on each panelist, I would certainly encourage you to view the speaker biographies, which were included in the event communications. Just a few administrative comments before we start. We have reserved some time at the end of the webinar to focus on any questions from the audience. We have already received quite a few excellent pre-submitted questions that we will try to address as we move through the webinar. But if you do have additional questions that come up organically through the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A button, and we will try to address any of those with the time allotted. So without further ado, let me turn the floor over to Eric to begin the conversation.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank all of the wonderful panelists today. So, I guess the first part of this, I sort of want to set the stage about this discussion in terms of wellness, because we'll be talking about a lot of different concepts today. So I always like to sort of define those concepts before we sort of start the interactive discussion. And I wanted to speak to Janine first. And one of the things I wanted to talk to Janine about was what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sort of having a little bit of a discussion about that first. So Janine, what do you think?
Hi, Eric.
Hello.
So I am well, thank you. How are you?
I'm hanging in there.
Excellent. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, which is, there's lots of different ways that people characterize this, this group of work. And really, ultimately, what it's about is that everybody feels welcome at the table. Everybody has equity, which is essentially about having a voice. So, when we think about diversity, what we're talking about is racial and ethnic diversity, certainly, also men and women. We're talking about sexual orientation. We're talking and gender identity. We are talking about abledness and non-abledness, disabledness. We're talking about neurodiversity. So, when we think about diversity, we really want to think in the largest terms that we can, so that really we are including the whole panoply of what it looks like to be in the world of work today. And then we want to ensure that everybody really feels welcomed and included, like they belong, because they do belong. And part of how we feel like we belong is when we have a voice, when we have an opportunity to really participate. So that's really what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is all about.
All right, so one question is I have, does anybody want to add to equity? Any of the other panelists? Sort of bring it. If not, I call on people. How about Lili? Any thoughts on what equity is? You guys feel free to turn your cameras on, everybody, all the rest of the panelists.
All right. Yeah, I agree with Janine's very broad description of DEI and belonging. I think equity can mean a lot of different things depending on how any institution defines it. In some institutions, equity may mean, equity relating to pay. It may mean equity relating to opportunities to compete for positions or opportunities of work, and others. So I'm happy to welcome others to join in some of those definitions, because I think they do depend on the institution and their definition.
Anybody else want to have a little bit of, anybody else want to add to that before we move on to the next concept? All right. How about Amanda? What do you think about wellness?
Yeah, so as far as wellness goes, during COVID, I think that there's been an increased, presence and an association of our kind of looking and seeing our lives and thinking about, the increased stress, the increased uncertainty, the loneliness when people were more in isolation. And I think that it really put a spotlight on mental health in this country. And, also the opioid epidemic continues to be an issue as well. Because, I work specifically in a lot of work as far as mental health parity is concerned. So obviously I look at the news with that lens. So I think that looking at equity from that perspective is of course interesting to me, and is important, I think, for the country as a whole. I think that, as far as mental health parity goes, part of equity is looking at what limitations are on care, and what kinds of barriers there are to treatment, which continues to be an ongoing issue.
Okay. Now I'm gonna surprise guess Mimsey. I see you over there, and I know you're in the healthcare field, so that's why I didn't want to leave you out of this wellness discussion. So what do you
saw me nodding at what Amanda was saying.
Yeah. So what do you feel? How do you feel about the concept of wellness in this definition?
I agree with everything Amanda just said. I think that it is, especially as it relates to equity, and healthcare, different people receive different types of healthcare, which is a sad fact of sort of the way that the healthcare system in America is set up. Different meaning all sorts of things, socioeconomic, race, gender, whatever. But no one person, nobody receives the same healthcare that everybody else receives. And it's a problem that is difficult to solve, if not impossible. But people are working, hard in healthcare and in, various aspects of healthcare, not just providers, but like administrators and the lawyers and everybody else, to try to address that issue in different ways.
So this isn't meant to be political, but it's going to come off as that. It's like when Donald Trump, when he had COVID, the airplane came to his house, which was the White House at the time, and they picked him up and airlifted him. And I was like, that's a quality of healthcare that not many of us would be able to sort of obtain in our daily lives. So whenever we talk about disparities, that sort of example always comes to my mind at that point in time.
No, it's so true, and it's it's a big part of what I was going to talk about in a couple of minutes. But
all right,
yeah,
all right, we'll save that then. All right, Lili, we're lawyers here, and we've sort of talked about some concepts that are sort of legal, but not really legal. But there's sort of some laws in this area as well, aren't there? What are the sort of actual legal laws that you would say sort of impact wellness in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, wellness has been on my mind now for some time for a lot of the reasons that, Andre described at the beginning of this webinar. And, there are laws that provide folks with opportunities to attend to their wellness. The ones that are most commonly known are the ones that people use in order to actually, get some job protected time off. And, there's a federal law that probably people will, remember hearing about, the Family Medical Leave Act, which is a federal law that provides for 12 weeks of job protected leave for folks. Doesn't provide for paid time off, but many employers across the country do provide for, their employees to use paid time off to supplement their pay during their time off. And that's always, helpful. But we've seen in Massachusetts, the Paid Family Medical Leave Act as well, which is sort of the state equivalent of the federal law, except for it does provide for pay, some pay at the very least, and does also afford employers to provide for paid time off. I've seen, in my career, the lifetime of my career, lots of state, leave laws come out, and the one in Massachusetts, I'm happy to say, I think is very protective. So it provides up to 26 weeks of paid time off, job protected leave for folks, prohibits retaliation and the like. And I'm sure, Eric, you've sort of dabbled in this area as well. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it. And then the other one that we've been hearing a lot about is the Americans with Disabilities Act and reasonable accommodations that are afforded under that law. Many folks availed themselves of the ADA during COVID, whether it was for long COVID or for people who were experiencing the need for accommodations because of, pre-existing or evolving healthcare issues that required them to have accommodations in their workplace. So those are sort of the three laws that immediately come to mind for me. I will add two things very quickly, and that is that sometimes the law of your workplace are the policies, right, that apply to employees. And so I always encourage people to look at the policies and what is afforded by their employer in this space, because so for instance, at Tufts, we have something called wellness leave. And if you take wellness leave, you can take up to 8 hours of time off. You can allocate your sick time to that, and you can use it to attend to wellness related issues as defined in the policy. In addition, I always encourage people when I'm thinking about wellness to make sure that they know what they're entitled to in terms of vacation and sick time, because both of those things can support wellness. And very finally, only because this is the Tufts Lawyers Association, I cannot leave my piece without talking about the professional rules applicable to lawyers. And, the model rules, which we all try to, hopefully always try to follow, have Rule 1.1, which relates to attorney competence. And there's been a lot of discussion. The ABA has really focused on this piece, trying to encourage people to realize that in order to be a competent lawyer, one needs to be a well lawyer. And that may mean taking care of yourself in all the ways that I just described. And as a shameless plug for something I think is really important, it is actually Wellbeing Week in the Law this week. So this is like a perfectly timed webinar. And I will share in the link a link to the Wellbeing in the Law website, which has every single day, like readings, audio, podcasts, webinars, et cetera, so that we as lawyers can take care of ourselves as well as our clients. Thank you.
Since you did a plug for me in the beginning about this, I will jump out of my moderator sort of skin and hop into my actual lawyer skin, because this is what I do on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, you said everything correct about the FMLA. It's 12 weeks of job protected leave for specific qualifying events and for specific family members. So something happens to you, your spouse, your kids, leave your I'm not sure if your grandparents are in there, but specific list of people you could take leave off. And the FMLA leave is fairly broad. So it's probably it's more than a cold, but it's not much more than a cold. And the same thing with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you'd be surprised of how broad the scope of what they qualify as a disability is. And under that, you have protected as well. You can take a leave of absence from work, and that can be considered a reasonable accommodation. And the term reasonable accommodation is basically, if you have to come to work and, for example, maybe you have some vision problems, they may give you an accommodation that help you interact with your computer screen or a specific chair. So there's lots of accommodations that can be done in the workplace. And one of the accommodations could be a leave of absence as well. So that's my sort of quick 2 cents on some of the laws in this area. So, all right. So the Great Resignation, what is that, Janine, in your opinion? What does that refer to?
So when people are talking about the Great Resignation, what we're talking about is that the rates of people quitting their jobs, this isn't retirement, this isn't being laid off, this isn't being fired, it's people voluntarily deciding to quit their jobs, has really been skyrocketing. And in 2021, we have had almost 50 million people quit their jobs. And the rates of people quitting their jobs has been being tracked over the last 2 decades. And it has been trending somewhere around 1.5 million to about 3.5 million. We are now at 4.5 million a month, give or take a little bit, for the last 4 months. And we have been well above average ever since March of 2021. So for the last year and a month, we have been trending at least an additional 1 million people a month quitting their job. So that's what people are talking about when we're talking about this Great Resignation, is that people are quitting their jobs at unprecedented numbers for a sustained period of time.
We know why.
We actually do know why. So our friends from down the road at MIT did a big study that was just released in March. And what it revealed is that the #1 reason that people are quitting their jobs, 10.4 times more important than compensation, so salary and benefits, is what the folks at MIT called toxic organization. And the things that exist in that bucket are, in priority order, organizations not doing enough around diversity, people feeling not listened to, and then various things that go essentially in the category of a toxic manager, of being bullied, of being left out of meetings, of being really put upon by a manager or a boss. But the #1 thing, and part of the reason that in this conversation around wellness, we're talking about diversity, is because all these things really intersect. And the #1 reason that people are quitting their jobs is because of their organizations not doing enough around diversity. And when I was first talking with folks about this phenomenon, I was talking with a group of CEOs, and they said, wait, okay, well, were all the people interviewed millennials? Like, is that why the answer came back that way? And I said, well, here's the thing. In 2.5 years, 75% of the workforce will be millennials and the Gen Zs who are coming after them. So yes, I'm sure millennials were overrepresented because in fact, they are overrepresented in our workforce. And those of us in the older generations, whether or not we agree that that would be the #1 thing pushing us to leave a job, need to understand that that is the #1 thing that is leading the younger generations in the workforce to leave their jobs. And really, they are the workforce. So we need to understand this and get behind it in a new way.
All right, so I'm going to complain first and then ask a question. So my first complaint is that I struggle to deal with some of my, I'm on the other side of the fence. I don't know when I got there, but I happened to be on the other side of the fence. We wanted to hire somebody. She was like, I don't want to come into the office. And, we didn't hire her, but the other people have the same sort of reaction. So there's definitely a recruitment and retention issue buried in a lot of these issues as well. But did anybody else want to sort of opine on sort of the diversity and inclusion and how that sort of interplays with like the Great Resignation and sort of some of the patterns we're seeing right now? So anybody, don't be afraid to raise your hand. All right.
I'll add to that,
Yep.
if that's okay. I mean, just to go back to the previous question around equity, I mean, fundamentally, when folks think about equity, right, they think about fairness, like just, sort of justness of conduct, impartiality, transparency. And, Janine, I'm curious, like with the MIT study, my guess is that some of the toxicity that folks talked about, apart from DEI and sort of priorities around those specific issues, people really feel like if they're involved in a situation where others are being treated differently than them, regardless of what the reason is, that's not the kind of workplace that maybe they would want to stay in. So I don't know if you want to add something to that, Janine, but it seems like maybe that would be sort of hand in hand with the DEI aspect of your comments.
Yeah, and I am sure from what I know in the research that I've conducted in this arena, absolutely that is true. And the other thing that is important to understand is that neurobiologically in our brain, interestingly, cannot differentiate between someone else being treated poorly and me being treated poorly. My brain sees it as the same. So, like, as far as my brain is concerned, we really are the same. We're the same person. And so if you're being mistreated, that's going to have an impact on me in my brain, deep in the amygdala of my brain, the fight, flight, or freeze center of my brain, the same way that it would if it's me who's being mistreated. And our other folks across the road at the Harvard Business Review came out with a survey that says, as of 2021, 99% of people in the workforce have experienced incivility. And so, like, this idea of toxicity in the workplace and the way that it impacts both us and others is having a huge impact. And it then has a huge impact actually on our health and well-being. Mimsey, did you want to pipe in here?
Oh yeah, thanks, Janine. I just wanted to say that toxicity and sort of the incivility, it's a big part of why we are seeing such a huge portion of the healthcare providers just leave. It's obviously COVID has been really disruptive to the healthcare profession, but a lot of what we're seeing when we have, when providers leave, and not just doctors, nurses, but the people who help run hospitals every day, which is way more than just, doctors and nurses, they're leaving because they're sick of getting yelled at. They're sick of irate patients and family members, yelling and screaming at them after they've worked 48 hours in a row. And it is a real problem. The sort of Great Resignation part of the healthcare profession is going to be very detrimental to everyone because we all need healthcare. And it really is, it's a real problem on a day-to-day basis.
All right, anybody else?
I was going to say, I know that, there's been increased funding for the Mental Health Parity Addiction Equity Act, where, the DOL and HHS and other governmental agencies have been trying to work to get some of the kind of systemic issues addressed that relate to, limit specifically on mental health and substance use disorder providers. For better or for worse, that law targets specifically the comparison of the medical, surgical versus the mental health SUD, not saying that there aren't issues on the med-surg side as well, but that's the limitation for better or for worse of the law. And to the extent that there are issues with people's employee benefits, to the extent that they are staying in their jobs and not leaving, I can provide the toll-free number where people can, log complaints relating to their employee benefits.
Okay. You said some concepts there. I just want to make sure I get them right. You said med-surg.
I've worked in this industry a long time, so apologies if I use some acronyms without explaining them. So feel free to call me out.
Yes, you said med-surg relative to something else. And
Yeah,
you said
sure.
S something something.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you can tell I do this all day, every day. Yeah, so, there's, from mental health parity perspective, the way the law is written is that there can't be excess limitations, exclusions on mental health and substance use disorder benefits as compared to medical and surgical benefits. And, as we all know, as far as being lawyers, comparisons under law can be hard, right? Because then everything has to be about if mental health and substance use disorder treatment is treated worse than medical surgical. And so I was trying to be funny and making a joke that, obviously there are issues on the med-surg side as well. And so that comparison can be hard, which I think a lot of people would say is true. I think everyone would probably say that. And so I was alluding to that, how that is a challenge, but that, under mental health parity, we are trying to address issues specific to mental health and substance use disorder providers and issues relating to, providing equitable care.
So if I were to sum up what you said, I think what you said is, if I go to the hospital with a broken arm, I'm supposed to get the same level of care with a broken arm as if I have a substance abuse issue.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the insurance companies would say that those are two very different things, and you would have to make sure that you're comparing outpatient services to outpatient services, but generally, yes.
All right.
If you're getting a comparable medical surgical service, they should be comparably treated versus mental health and substance use disorder treatment.
And you sort of talked about it, but I was going to say, how does mental health play into this whole field? Was that the answer, or did you have more to add on that?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I was saying, how does mental health play into this? You sort of answered it a little bit, but I don't know if you had anything else. That was sort of the next topic.
As far as equity inclusion?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as employer-sponsored health benefits go, when people have issues seeking mental health care, that could be an issue too, to perhaps not staying in your job, right? Like not retaining employment, not getting proper care, that kind of issue. And so that's partially what I was alluding to, that, when you obviously are getting proper mental and medical treatment, that you're more likely to be, stay in your job and being a productive employee, independent, of course, of external things like having a bad boss or other external kind of situations separate from employee benefits.
Okay. And the next one on the list is Mimsey. How's this sort of played out in the healthcare field?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself, Eric. Yeah, so I think as far as wellness and sort of DEI in the workplace, it's obviously, it's critical in the healthcare field. I know I said this earlier, but COVID-19 has, it sounds silly because it's so obvious, but it's been hugely draining from a mental and physical perspective, on the healthcare field. And while a lot of the country has been able to work from home, whether full-time or remotely, nobody in healthcare has. And so there is just, it is a lot of, it's a lot of pressure on these folks. And I don't even include myself as being part of these folks because, I'm not on the front lines. I just sit in my office all day. But it's hard. Even, as an example, the disparity from different hospitals. You know, a local to Massachusetts safety net hospital just 3 months ago had to close its NICU for a couple of months due to staffing shortages that were brought on by the third Omicron COVID wave. And so babies were separated from their moms, and you know, patients who needed care were sent into Boston by ambulance or med flight, which further strained the Boston hospitals. And then these moms who had just given birth and had these babies in the NICU had to then find a way to get into Boston to see their babies. And for a lot of these patients, you know, that travel is an expense that they can't afford. You know, and it's also scary. You know, and as another example, a cafeteria in a different safety net hospital was closed for a couple of weeks in late 21, again due to staffing shortages that were brought on by the required quarantine periods that most hospitals, well, all hospitals have to follow because of COVID. And, you know, that creates a situation where people come to work, you know, their 12, 24, 48-hour shift, and they either eat what they could hopefully bring from home, or they have to rely on a vending machine for their shift. And all of these patients at this 300-bed hospital were given shelf-stable, you know, room temperature food during that time. So imagine if you're in the hospital for 10 days after surgery and you're eating peanut butter crackers for like 10 days. You know, and so that's, yeah, right, exactly. But that's an issue that, you know, you may not face at a different hospital that's not a safety net hospital, because it comes down to, at the end of the day, funding, you know, and patient involvement and advocacy, really, which is sad, but it's kind of, it's true, it's an issue. And so I think that, you know, I guess just another sort of way is that these types of these conversations and kind of planning for these scenarios, which, you know, until March of 2020, the thought of closing a NICU when people were actually having babies, like in the middle of them having babies, before COVID would never have happened. It would have been an exercise in like, oh, what if this, you know, crazy thing happened? What would we do then? It's made healthcare sort of this very difficult and stressful place to work. And I think most healthcare companies do recognize these challenges that providers are facing and are trying to update or implement, you know, wellness programs to provide additional assistance to their employees, but also recognizing that these families of patients have also, it's very stressful. You know, your grandfather is dying of COVID in the hospital and his wife can't go be with him. That is a real stressful, awful situation that affects obviously the people going through it, but also the providers who are there trying to support these patients.
Anybody else have anything? You had something to add on that, Janine?
I did. I just wanted to add, you know, when we're also thinking about it through the lens of diversity and the impacts on all kinds of different communities, you know, the rates are very well established in terms of the rates of people getting sick and dying from COVID in the Black, African American, Latino communities is significantly higher. And there was just a piece in the LA Times. While I grew up in Cambridge, I'm now living in Pasadena. There was a piece in the LA Times today that was talking about how Black and Latino communities, in particular in Southern California, are really concerned about the mask mandates being lessened here in California because they are significantly more at risk. And, you know, when we're talking about equity, I mean, there's the huge issue around the healthcare services and the mental health services that people of color can access. You know, the rates of Black women dying during childbirth and having other very difficult circumstances during childbirth are very different than white women And then you have the whole issue of stigma around mental health, particularly in the African American and Latino communities. And so, really looking at this from all of the different angles about how do we help people access the services that they need, and then how do we ensure that biases are not coming into play on the part of the healthcare providers or the healthcare systems.
All right. Anybody else? I have some little hypotheticals I want to run through a little bit before we end this game show. So, I've diversity and equity inclusion, and there's, in terms of increasing diversity, I heard that there's this law called Title VII, and it prevents discrimination. How can you try to increase diversity when you have these laws that say you can't discriminate against people based upon race, gender, anything like that? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
So I'll jump in. Lili, you go first.
Okay, we'll do it together.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'll just start by saying that, and this is something that I think, regulators would tell anybody, right? Look at your hiring process. How does your pool look? And how do you actually recruit people? Where are you recruiting people from? In addition to looking at your workplace and what draws people to your workplace. So that's sort of like, at least step one around this, which does end up building a large pool of folks who are interested in coming to your organization, and hopefully, supports diversity, equity, inclusion if that is a mission for your organization as well, because it'll be meaningful for folks in terms of mission planning.
So what about if I just say I have a new position for CFO and I say, well, I really want that to be a woman's position. Can I do that?
So you started this, Eric, and I'll go back to what you said. Title VII, with one exception, provides for equal opportunity for all individuals for jobs like the one that you're describing. However, there is some modest case law that talks about affirmative action, which is a topic for something more than what we have left, like 20 minutes, but where an organization may have had an issue of sex discrimination where you may actually be remedying a problem or an issue, right, that the organization has defined. But otherwise, specifically earmarking a job like that, it could be problematic.
Okay. And so I'm gonna do my quick 2-sentence summary of what Lili just said. She got it all right. So in terms of increasing diversity in the workplace and from a numerical standpoint, the right way to do it is to expand your pool of candidates rather than selecting a specific person for a specific job. And what that means is if you always go to Tufts University for your applications, sometimes you might want to draw from a more diverse pool. I'm not saying Tufts isn't diverse, you might correct me, but the point is that if you're always looking in the same pool, you're probably going to come up with the same results. So you have to expand and look in different pools to have more diverse candidates if that's an objective for yours. And I just wanted to get that sort of on the table from a Title VII / civil rights sort of aspect to it. Now,
and part of the way that, once you've got a pool of candidates, HR can do things to help level the playing field. I was just up in the Bay Area this weekend with my two goddaughters who happen to be named Sakori and Janisha. As you might suspect, those are two young Black women. And names can be very indicative of culture, of heritage. So you can have people black out the name, black out the school that they went to. If really what part of what you may be trying to get different kinds of experiences and different kinds of people. I mean, the reality is that organizations that are more diverse are 37% more profitable than organizations that are not diverse. So there are business reasons for organizations to want diversity. And so, but you want diversity on gender and race and ethnicity and schooling. And, so you want to be able to look at all kinds of different diversities. And part of the way to get to that is to essentially have it be blind. When you're looking at resumes to then have people come in, you don't let it be known what the gender is, where they went to school, what their race and ethnicity might be based on their name.
So I'm going to move to the next question, but last thing. Who's the biggest player in the game for salsa? I can't remember their name. The salsa, literally, who where we buy salsa, the one that makes the most popular brand.
Is it a Frito-Lay company?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah.
Mimsey?
I don't know, I was gonna say Tito's, but I think that's vodka.
Yeah, I think you're wrong.
That definitely
Amanda?
is vodka. Yeah.
As
You
it
know
says,
what?
vodka.
Yeah,
It's what popped into my mind though.
But it's not Heinz. and I can't remember. It's the yellow brand.
Oh, El
Whatever.
Paso, or El Paso, something like that. Old El Paso.
Long story short is Heinz ketchup. Somebody presented salsa to them as a business product. It was a very undiverse group of people at the time. And they said it wasn't a good product to sort of stand behind. I think it's the number one condiment now, and Heinz isn't, it's at least it's the leadership in ketchup, but it sort of missed the bus on salsa. And that was a specific case for a business case for diversity. So I just wanted to point that out. All right. The next one I want to talk about a little bit is sort of returning to the workplace, or sort of kind of returning to the workplace. And we've talked about the concept of reasonable accommodation and things like that. So if I'm an employee and I have been out of work for 2 years, working remotely, and then all of a sudden you say, I really want you to come back to work, because I think I really want you to be in the office more often. And then the employee says, well, I have this medical condition, I can work from home. And then you say, well, no, I really want you to come in. And I say, well, I want that as a reasonable accommodation. It's the fact that I've worked from home for 2 years mean that I can work from home forever. So I don't know if anybody sort of wants to what they think about that. I think Lili is probably the one that might have some thoughts on it.
I can take that. This is, I hate to be sort of overly lawyerly, but it will be sort of a, it depends type of response, because there are a lot of questions that I would have if that were a case or situation that came to me. But as a general matter, the sort of touch point for sort of a job evaluation when you're thinking about the ADA is what are the essential functions of the job, right?
Tostitos.
What's
Sorry.
that?
Sorry, somebody put in the chat, it was Tostitos was what I was looking for.
Tostitos. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
So so if you're thinking about the essential functions of the job, I would have a lot of questions about that. What are the essential functions of the job? Is the person doing the job as we have defined it, and able to do it from home? Has the job changed? Because the employer certainly has a lot of rights around, refining the job, revising the job. And it would also sort of, I would ask for folks to be thinking about what are the policies at the organization? Are there telework policies? Are we giving other people opportunities to work at home? And how do we view this person in light of others who have the same kind of benefit? So there are a lot of moving parts here that would require an individualized analysis of this particular matter. But it's certainly a question, Eric, as you and I both know. This very robust question and analysis is probably what's taking up a large piece of both of our portfolios right now.
Yeah. So when the pandemic first started 2 years ago, everybody worked remotely. And my first thing, I was like, you're not going to be able to get some of these people back. I was like, because, you used to say you can't do this job from home. Well, they just did. And that's going to be your greatest obstacle, to say it can't be done from home unless you can prove it. And I always advise clients to say, keep performance metrics of how that job is doing, because maybe at the end of it, you might be able to make it, prove it. But if you just let them do it for 2 years and say they did a good job, good luck. So that's one of the things I've always said. I think we got that one. What should organizations know to help mitigate discrepancies in care and well-being, physical and emotional, for traditionally underrepresented communities? That might be, this looks like it might be up Amanda's alley, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, again, because this is my lens, I work a lot in mental health parity, and the new funding I talked about has to do with the Consolidated Appropriations Act that came out 2 years ago. And health insurance plans are required to provide analyses of how they're providing mental health benefits and whether they're comparable to medical surgical benefits, whether they're, imposing increased limitations, exclusions, restrictions. So, the idea is that with increased disclosure and increased knowledge, I think there's an idea in the industry that then, employers can also choose to provide increased benefits, right? That they can coordinate with the health insurance companies and together provide better benefits for their employees.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, I have one more question, and we may have answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Somebody might have a little different perspective on it. How can people suffering from long COVID protect themselves in the workplace against accommodation denials, unlawful termination, and/or insurance denials? I think we may have gotten that a little bit. Anybody want to sort of add to it? So,
I think, Eric, I'll say this, Eric, you and I both talked about the leave laws and options that folks have, both legally and also policy related, that would provide folks with long COVID with opportunities and options to remain employed while still taking time off that they might need to, get and stay well. So I'm just going to underscore that. I think, in terms of the larger question around benefits, I'll sort of defer to Amanda. If I don't know if you guys have dealt with long COVID and sort of benefits issues in that space, but certainly long COVID can very well be a disability under the ADA, and would be afforded all the same protections that we talked about.
Yeah, long COVID has been in the news. I think it's very much a developing issue. I don't know that there's really definitive ideas about how to handle it, because I think we're also just trying to figure out what exactly it entails. I see it in the news a lot recently that it seems very unclear, like to what extent it's even impacting people. I don't know if we know yet.
Yeah, so I agree. The one thing I would think, it's sort of, so Lili, I think, spoke about this earlier. The leave laws in the United States are really much a creature of not only federal law, not only state law, but actually sometimes county and citywide. And there's been a sort of, probably in the last 15 or 20 years, the leave laws sort of overlap with each other. But if you happen to live in a state that has very robust leave laws, you're probably getting entitled to maybe about 6 months-ish, give or take, of some type of leave that can keep you out. And then if you're under the ADA, you might be able to extend that a little bit. So while the FMLA only offers 12 weeks, there are other leaves that allow you to sort of extend that out a little bit. So one last question, it might be last, but we'll see. There's a worker shortage on one hand, right? Sort of, there's tons of people resigning. There's tons of people working from home. What is everybody's sort of view on the work-life balance aspect of it, because now there's to some extent you have less employees, you have them arguably doing less at work, maybe kind of sorta, but there's still the work to get done. So how have you who employ people have dealt with that issue?
So one of the things that I work with my clients around is really thinking about, in part back to that issue of demanding workers come back to the office, is that there have been a number of studies that counterintuitively have said that people have actually gotten more work done over this time being at home. Because they may be working non-traditional hours. I mean, some of us who are on this call today have young children who are running around behind your backgrounds. And so, people are figuring out how to get the key things that need to get done. And so part of the opportunity for employers is to really be looking at, rather than how much time are my employees spending working, is really instead looking at, key measures of performance and key things that need to get accomplished, and measuring people on that way instead of by how much time you're spending doing work. And so it connects back to this issue of looking at employee wellness through a very different lens. We've had an opportunity to have insight into really what people's lives are like in a very different way over the last 2 years than we ever did prior to this.
Yeah. I mean, you're looking in my kitchen, and things like that. So in terms of the windows into people's lives, the window is different than it used to be. And does anybody want to speak on how the last couple of years have sort of impacted parents or those taking care of people at home? I mean, I know there's a lot of people taking care of elders, their parents and things like that. So does anybody have any interesting sort of perspective on being a parent during the pandemic and working from home? I see Mimsey.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know if it's interesting other than horrifying.
It can be the same sometimes.
I think that there is a reason why the number of women who have left the workforce since March of 2020 is as high as it is. It is extremely hard to take care of children who can't go to school, can't go to daycare, can't go to their grandparents, are stuck at home with their parents, and work. I think it's even harder. I come at it from a very privileged perspective because I was working at home with my husband, who was also working at home, and our small kids. And so while it was not fun in any way, at least we could work from home. I was never going to get fired because I couldn't go in, unlike a lot of people who had to go in during COVID. And so I think that it really sort of brought to the forefront the lack of safety nets and kind of help that working parents have in terms of, childcare providers, schools being closed and having to do Zoom school, and work a job at the same time. There's a lot of equity issues there as well. And I don't know how long it will take to get back to, hopefully, to where we were before, if we can. I don't know.
So I'm going to give you my final thought. I said this at the end of the pandemic. I said the rich got richer, the poor got poorer. And that was sort of my unfortunate takeaway from most of the pandemic. Those who had the opportunities and the privilege to do a lot of things, that was sort of, that gap had widened in the last 2 years. So anybody else want to add anything? We have 4 minutes left. All right, I think we're good. We have the MC, the real MC back here, Andre, so I'll let you take it from here.
Well, thank you very much, Eric, and thank you to all the panelists this evening. I hope that you all found this to be thought-provoking and informative. I certainly did. I think a lot of the conversations that we had in this forum today are conversations we're all having in our homes, in our workplaces around many of these issues that are converging together, whether it's D&I issues, whether it's mental wellness issues, physical wellness issues. I think we're in an unprecedented time, obviously. I don't think anyone, to your comments earlier, Mimsey, would have ever imagined 2 years ago that we would have a situation where the world sort of comes to an end, if you will, and we have to deal with everyone working from home. So I think it's been challenging. I do think certainly there's been some, as I mentioned earlier, degradation in wellness that many of us don't want to admit, but I think it's all affected all of us. So we appreciate your attending tonight. If there are any questions that come up after the panel closes that you would like to, that were not answered, were not addressed, or you feel you want to bring up, please feel free to send them out to us and we will do our best to answer those. So with that, again, thank you for attending, and I hope everyone has a fantastic evening.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.